We took something that someone would shoot, whether it's a corporate shoot or a feature type narrative, and we pushed the limits of it.
Way overexposed, way underexposed, to see where they both break down, because they will break down. It's just really how far you can get away with it.
The night test is probably the ultimate test of the camera.
If there's any other place that's going to be a camera kill box, this is kind of that area. I mean, this is designed to break the camera.
Welcome to our first live show, the Zacuto 2018 Live Camera Shootout. I'm Steve Weiss, Director and Product Designer at Zacuto. For a while now, we've been wanting to create live content, and now we're doing it. Mainly, live makes it easier for us to get the high-profile guests that you want to hear from, no matter where they are, via Skype on our live shows. Starting next month, we're going to have a regular scheduled show called Zacuto Live, and topics will include subjects that are important to us as filmmakers and content creators. As always, we hope our programs will inspire and inform you. We'll have interview and educational episodes with incredible guest talent. We'll do some shows like Film Fellas and Critics in this new live format. We'll have DPs, producers and directors, everything from new equipment to script writing, budgeting, directing, producing, lighting, working with actors, or anything you want. So feel free to email us guest suggestions or show ideas to live@zacuto.com, and we'll find the talent and we'll produce those shows for you. Now let's get started. So let's talk about the 2018 Shootout. This year we're doing a tighter comparison. It's more of a duel than a shootout. We focused on two similar feature price cameras, the Panasonic EVA1 and the Canon C200. So let's meet the players. In this corner we have Mitch Gross from Panasonic.
Hey there.
Mitch, tell us a little bit about your past.
Okay, well, so I was a cinematographer about 20 years, and then had kids, so decided to go to the other side of the fence of it a little. I went to Able Cine, sales and service and rental. After a number of years doing that, went over to Convergent Design, accessory manufacturer, and now I am at Panasonic, the cinema product manager for the US, and that's the Vericams and the EVA1.
And we've known each other.
About 15 years now.
This is
something
actually
like
an
that.
interesting crowd. I think we've all known each other 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, we've been around.
Tim, I've known you for 20 years.
Maybe even more. Feels like it.
Could be.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
So I'm Canon's senior advisor for film and television production, and I've been with Canon 30 years. So I have no background other than that. I was born 30 years ago last week. I get to work with high-profile productions and these tests, and I've worked with Bruce even on films that Bruce has shot for himself. It's a good gig.
Well, you've worked on stuff with us too.
And with you as well, yeah. I got to work with some really great people.
Now, you did work on Birth of a Nation, or you did not?
The sequel?
No, the original.
I've not even seen the original, actually.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So.
All right, and now we have Bruce, our buddy Bruce. Hey.
Great to be your first high-profile guest, as you described it. You know?
You are our first high-profile. Well, come on, don't put these guys
No,
there. They're
I'm not.
high-profile guests too.
No.
So, for those that don't know, I mean, your past.
Yeah, well, I started off as an animator when I was 12 years old.
So you did work on Birth of a Nation.
I did.
Okay, good.
The original.
Yeah.
And Intolerance. But no, so I started off in animation, and I kind of segued into visual effects. So there have been 3 tiers to my career, which have been visual effects, and as a director of photography, and as a director. So I've worked on movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Tron, I was the director of photography on. And my claim to fame is that I blew up the Death Star in the original Star Wars movie. So.
Oh, I thought your claim to fame was this is your second administered shootout for Zacuto.
Yes, it is.
Wow, that hurt my feelings. Okay, well, for those that don't know my background, I've been in the business since around 1980, but seriously since 1983. Jens and I have been working together for about 33 years. We shot about 700 projects between 1983 and 2001, mainly corporate, commercial, documentaries, things like that. Oh, fashion videos. And then we took a short break and then came back in 2008 when you could actually put videos on the internet. And we've done 7 web series, several documentaries, and we've made some products along the way. And I didn't forget this time, Rachel. Now I'm going to introduce. Hi. Now I'm going to introduce Rachel Marl. How do I say your last name? I do this wrong every time.
Marl.
Oh, like
Marl,
Carl.
like Carl.
Right, Marl. And you are our, which I also can't say.
I am
it
your
wrong every
digital
time.
marketing director.
Right. And why don't you tell us a little bit about how this whole process is going to go?
Sure. So I'm already monitoring everybody's comments on the feeds, and I will be feeding comments and questions to you guys throughout the show. So if anybody's got a question as we go, write it on up, and I will try to get as many answered as possible. Before we get started, I want to let everybody know about some special offers. Our good friends at B&H have put together some great deals for our live viewers. So after the show, you can head to bnh.com/Zacuto event 18. I'll put the link in the comments now, and at the end, the offers are valid until March 20th, so thank you to B&H. And CSI Rentals in New York are offering 25% off rentals of both the C200 and the EVA1 today in honor of the live show. So thank you to both of them. I'm going to put the links in right now. If anybody's got any questions, let's get started.
Terrific. All right, so Bruce, let's just quickly talk about the tests that we did and how you did it. I want to explain, though, that as in every shootout we've ever done, Zacuto really has nothing to do with the shootout. We get an administrator, and then it's all you. You decide.
Well, you paid for it, right, honey?
Yeah, we pay for it. but you do what you want to do.
You know.
So
no,
what did you want to do?
Absolutely. Well, this was different than the other shootouts I've done because we were really focusing on 2 cameras. So I had the opportunity to, unlike the other ones that I've done, it's like you set up a shot and then you put one camera on and you film the shot, and then you take the camera off, you put the next camera on, and you shoot what you hope is an identical shot, but they never are. So this time we got to actually shoot the cameras side by side. Jens from Zacuto came up with this fantastic focusing system that we could pull focus on both lenses at the same time. And basically we had to adjust for a little parallax, but the images are basically identical. So it was a really good way of doing the test.
So just so people know, we did 6 tests. The first test is a day-night interior, and then we did a day-night exterior, and then we did a motion blur and a slow-mo. So
well, the motion blur is actually a rolling shutter.
Oh, rolling shutter, that's right. So for the purposes of what we're going to do today, we're only going to talk about the day-night interior and exterior. The other 2 tests you'll be able to see when Rachel posts this 30-minute video when we're done with the live show. And the 30-minute video is going to show all of these scenes that we're looking at with ramping ISOs, over and under exposures, and a whole lot of other bonus stuff.
Now, are they going to be able to look at our entire test at some point?
Yes, everything.
Okay.
Everything. Oh, but
because then they'll really be able to examine the footage and blow it up and take a look at their own thing.
Exactly.
Right?
So let me talk about this whole Facebook thing.
Yeah.
So the Facebook Live can only stream in 720p. So if you're on a phone or a tablet, it's going to look really good. But Rachel, each time we go to a test, she's going to post this 4K link. I got it right this time. And if you need to, go watch the 4K link. It's 2 minutes, and then come back and ask your questions, because the show is really just going to be user-driven, and we're just going to answer your questions. If you don't have questions, we got nothing to talk about. So with that, Ryan, why don't you play our first clip and let's get started.
These are two very reasonably priced cameras. These are really strong tools for high-end production at a low price point.
We took something that looks like something that someone would shoot, whether it's a corporate shoot or a feature type narrative, and we pushed the limits.
But we've got masses of negative fill, and we're using hardly any light on the foreground.
We had strongly lit backgrounds, we had light coming in through windows.
We actually had to go back and shoot more stuff in order to push the camera even harder because the camera's capturing lots and lots of information.
Once I'm seeing noise, I'm testing the cameras, so it's good.
Okay, Bruce, why don't you give us a little idea of what we're seeing?
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is a day interior. There's a lot of cool light coming from the inside. You can see this hard sunlight coming in on the floor. And you'll see in the picture, we've got a couple of practicals working. The only light that I have is coming from camera right, and it's a really soft edge light. And on the camera left side, we've got a massive negative fill, which is creating the dark look. So I wanted to see how the shadow areas were performing.
So you're basically removing light.
Yes, which is what you have to do with digital cameras these days.
So let me just explain here, because when you see it say LUT, we know what a LUT is. When it says what does it say? When it says graded, that's your version of the scene. And when it says, what is the middle thing it says? I forgot. But that's Rec 709.
Well, the LUT's coming directly out of the camera, and that's what you see on the monitor when you're shooting the image.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's the Rec 709. The log
Right.
is the log, and the graded is your version of the scene.
Exactly.
So this is interesting. Here you see 100% blow up.
Which no one's ever really going to see unless you're standing 5 feet away from the big screen in a cinema environment.
So I want to have a little quick conversation about this. Some people are going to see that the Canon has two different versions here. They have the MP4, and then they have the RAW. Now, Mitch, I want to ask you a question, because some people are going to say, wow, this isn't very fair because you only have a .mov. Why don't you address that?
Well, the time we did this test, the EVA1 would record in long GOP 150 megabit a second. That's a 10-bit 422 codec. And in fact, that's what we still currently have. But coming in a couple weeks, we're going to have another version, a all-eye intraframe 10-bit 422. So we have different recording formats in the camera, and also coming in a couple weeks, we're going to have a raw data output. So we have a lot of options coming, but it's like this is what we had at the time. And then C200 has different record formats. So it was the question of, well, to be fair, show the different ways that you can kind of compare these things. There's a lot of different ways you can slice and dice it.
Mm-hmm. So Bruce, talk to us about how you feel the cameras look comparative to each other.
Well, the first thing I did in grading was I took the uncompressed raw image from the Canon, but which I knew was going to be the most malleable footage, and I set a look. And then what I did with the other formats coming out of the camera was sort of match that look. I didn't try and force them and make them identical. I just kind of saw what the cameras wanted to do when you put that same kind of mood on the images. So I think what we found is that when you use these cameras normally, they're all fantastic images, and as the digital world has gone along, almost all cameras now have, if you expose them right and if you use them in the right format, they don't break. They have fantastic images. Now, if you try and break the camera with overexposure and underexposure, and that's what we've done in these tests, each camera has kind of a different characteristic. Obviously, the RAW breaks less than any of the other images. just because of it. And I believe RAW is going to be available on the other camera pretty soon, right?
2 weeks. 2 weeks we'll have the raw output.
So that's NAB, is it? Or?
That's before NAB.
Before NAB, wow.
Oh.
Okay, well, I know that your style, because I know that when Jens and I were recently shooting this TV pilot, we're like on the phone and you're going, Bruce.
Right.
I know that you have this kind of philosophy that we sort of used, which is, how we used to go for like a dense negative or a light negative. So why don't you explain that a little bit?
Well, yeah, the dynamic range on cameras these days, especially in RAW and, less so in 10-bit and even less in 8-bit, I take the brightest image in the scene and I make sure that that's not peaking over 100 on my monitor. I always set my exposure in Rec 709 because I know that's, the image is going to be spread out more in that format, and then I make sure that none of the whites are peaking, and I open up as much as I possibly can so that doesn't happen.
So dense negative at night.
So that I see in my shadow areas kind of as much noiseless detail as I possibly can.
Yeah. Okay, so Rachel, what do you have in the question department for us?
I have a quick question for Tim, which is someone, Joseph Carey was asking if the C200 sensor is the same as the C300 dual pixel AF.
The sensor is essentially the same. The processing is a bit different. So it'd be tough to kind of say they're identical, but Canon has created a 4K sensor since the original C300. Even though that was an HD camera, that was a 4K sensor in there. So we've never actually built in the cinema products an HD sensor. They've always been all 4K all the way through. So there's very similar properties. RAW will change your color. You don't have RAW on the other cameras, so we'll give you more color. So yeah, essentially the same. That would be the answer. Yeah.
And what about your sensor?
Okay.
This is an all-new sensor on the EVA1. It's actually a 5.7K sensor, and that's an oversampling so that you get a really high-quality 4K image, or then even more so for an HD image. And then when we actually have the RAW available in a couple weeks, you'll be able to take a RAW output of 5.7K and do up to 30 frames a second. So it is a completely new sensor design on this camera.
Okay, what else do you got for us, Rachel?
So Nathaniel, we've got some people talking about color here. Nathaniel DeCarma was talking, saying he thinks there's a blue tint coming out of things on the EVA1, and Lance was talking about magenta coming out of the C200. So Bruce, can you maybe talk about what differences you saw there while you were testing?
Yeah, well, I think monitoring what you see on the set is very unreliable, because really what you're doing is you're looking at a lot that's coming out of those cameras that will basically give you a good looking image to look at in the monitors that you're doing. But it really has nothing to do with what happens when you go into color correction. And any kind of shift like that, unless you're doing like news and there isn't going to be a color correction process, is in my world of cinema, it doesn't really make any difference, because they are so slight, these differences.
Well, you can create a LUT for either of these cameras, right?
Yeah, sure. and you should actually. The comment about magenta, if you're using the Canon supplied LUT, it does tend to go a little bit magenta. That's not actually what's on the RAW image, and it can certainly be dealt with in post. But the LUT that we supply has a little bit of a magenta tint to it. It's not the first time we've heard it. So
it's one of those things that where there's a human being behind it, an engineer who's deciding, I kind of like the skin tones to have a little more richness, so I'm going to give a little extra warmth, and then it can affect the shadow areas and such. I thought one of the interesting things with that footage that we were just looking at is that the walls in there there was a little debate going on of like, is that a light blue or is that a neutral gray? What color is that? I'm like, that was us staring at the wall. Like, what is that? So it's like, is the dress blue? Is it gray? And so when you're looking at it, when you looked at the two feeds from the cameras, you could see a difference, and then that difference was like, well, is that what's actually being recorded, or is that just the LUT that's being applied, to how it looks, and
right.
And then when you went into color correction, you could start fiddling them back and doing whatever you want with them. The cameras definitely have their own personalities. It's just what you're seeing on set at that moment. Okay, that's a little bit different.
So, Bruce, tell me, we've talked about this in the past, so, and everybody knows this. What, between those two cameras, you know, I know you've said you feel the Panasonic might be sharper, and, you know, what do you, and the Canon's more all about skin tone. What do you think?
Well, I think, you know, when you have any camera, it's like learning a film stock in the old days. You know, if you shoot to, well, I started on 52-51, which was 50 ASA, and that was the fastest film that was available to you. But, you know, so I look at a camera as a piece of film stock, and it's like getting to know what that camera does that allows you to use it in the most effective way, so that it becomes second nature for you to you know, expose it in a certain way and know what it's going to do in a given situation. You know, I think the other thing about the test is, and as we say, we're not really doing oranges and oranges here because, you know, we have a raw image, we have a 10-bit image and an 8-bit image. And I think the thing that you find out is that the math doesn't lie, you know, and that's what you're getting, you know. So, you know, it'll be, I'm dying to test the cameras again, both in raw format, and see what the difference is. You know?
Great.
So.
All right, Rachel, do you have another question for us?
I do. I am seeing everybody's questions coming in, guys. I just want to get one quick one in, and then we're going to show the next reel. So just a quick one. What RAW recorder will the EVA1 use? Ben wants to know.
Everyone's asking me because everyone can't wait to find out. And y'all gonna find out upon release of the firmware. We're gonna be able to
fun.
I am under NDA.
Oh, please.
So very soon you will
Adamus.
find out what will be supported and how. There's
Yeah, you have a horse in that race.
You know what? I will get in trouble if I say
Okay.
anything else.
It's
2 weeks.
Can you tell us what went into deciding which manufacturer you were going to support?
Oh no, we're open to partners. It's who's gonna put in the effort because they've got to support.
So
it.
there was one person that put in the effort.
I'm not going to
All
say
right.
who did what, but
Okay.
people have to be on both sides working together.
All right.
Very good.
Could you just give us initials or something?
Yeah.
I can give you the initials of a guy, and I can tell you who it is.
And are you running for president or not?
Yeah. All right, we're going to move on to the nighttime interior, and let's take a look.
We've got two cameras side by side. This little rig pulls focus on two lenses at the same time.
Well, it's a long day, but we did see a lot of different interesting things.
We had a lot of different lighting scenarios, simulated lights, we had color from the outside coming through windows.
We have our actor coming in from outside. He comes over here, sits down in the firelight.
Like, what are the color characteristics? What are the grain structures like? Can I go to 2500? Can I go to 25,000?
But then when you look at the results, you see how similar they can be and how different they can be. So it's one of those things where you really learn, you gotta get to know your own camera.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is a night exterior, and we're starting out with the back. There is a little backlight coming in from outside, and actually originally the shot was longer, and you see him walking through the window. We've got the Christmas tree lights outside. We have the practicals, luckily all on dimmers, so we were able to adjust them. And then we have firelight coming from camera left from low. And we have an edge light coming from the top of the stairs on the camera right side. And here's you know, what we were seeing on the monitor. And here's what I wanted to do with the picture.
It's
creatively.
Amazing. It really is. I mean, you start with that log, and then you go to the LUT, which looks like daytime.
Right.
And then you go to what you created, and it's just unbelievable. It shows that you can do anything.
And the reason that you can do that is that you've got a full negative. In other words, you've exposed it right. But what we've done with this, and people will be able to see the footage later on, as we get further and further underexposed, you'll be able to see what the noise patterns is in the black, and also just how much detail it's capturing at various degrees of underexposure.
I will say that there's always intent. So for the producers out there who think like, oh well, just shoot whatever, and then in post I can make it look like a nighttime moonlight. Whatever. Well, you do want to light your shot. You want to have Bruce knew where he wanted it to look. In the end, it shows you the cameras have a lot of room to be able to tweak and massage the image. But both of these cameras are going to be helped by you want to light it towards what you want, and you want to set the camera towards what it wants to be, and then it's going to really be there to fulfill it for you, because it's got a lot of room in there for you to tweak it as you go.
Right. Well, what you're really baking in when you shoot it is you're baking in the original lighting. So, and actually we're looking at the LUTed image, and I'm lighting to that. But when you see the log, it looks completely flat and like there is no lighting almost. So. But there is, and once you start dialing down, making it more contrasty, you can really see what the lighting looks like.
Did you actually crank the brightness down in the monitor?
No, I just, pretty much, I lit it by eye, basically.
So, but you lit it to the LUT, or did you create a LUT that looks like how you wanted it to look?
No, these LUTs were coming straight out of the camera, and I had them side by side so I could kind of average out what I was looking at, in terms of the LUTs.
Right. So I think it is important that people know that you just don't, go for this, washed out log image. You still have to light it the way you want to light it.
You can't relight in post.
And that LUT, the Rec 709 in the EVA1 versus the Rec 709 in the C200, they're interpretive by the companies.
Yes, absolutely.
They are their own things.
Right.
But and when you're talking about lighting as well, I mean, there's an awful lot of people that seem to light for volume and not for direction. So when you say you're baking in the lighting, it's not just a matter of saying, look, I splashed everything, there's enough light everywhere. But we did one test once with you guys where we had to have very even lighting for the test. And that wasn't very creative. Lighting is always about direction, not about volume. So it isn't just pumping up the lights and then bringing it down in post.
Right.
Nothing's changed.
Yeah.
I keep trying to tell people this.
No.
It's almost more like we were working on film than it is working on video now.
Well, it certainly is. In the early stages of digital, when dynamic ranges weren't as wide as they are now, you had to be a lot more careful, and you had to light differently than film. But I don't light any differently now than I would if I was shooting film.
That's terrific. Rachel, what do we got for a question?
We've got some good questions. I'm going to read this one. It's for Tim. I'm going to make sure I read it correctly. It's from a James Miller. He says, I would like to see a reduction of in-camera look options. Currently, there is some 38 different settings for the C300 Mark II. It would be nice to have a base matrix color across all, then gamma curve options, then final transform color mapping, etc.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
We're pretty good about being a Swiss Army knife when it comes to that kind of stuff. And yeah, it can be a little overwhelming, especially at a DIT cart when there's 6 million things to click. One of the suggestions is on the table is that we're not going to take them away, but we may be able to build something into like a My Menus section where we can just kind of show you the ones that you kind of want, or the ones that you would deal with the most. We're trying to fit a lot of different uses into the same product, and that can get a little bit confusing. And it's duly noted. Thank you for your point. But maybe one of the possibilities is a special menu for that, where you can just put up the 5 that you use the most.
Favorites.
Yeah, in a favorite section. Well, we already have a thing called My Menus, and then you can put certain things in there. If we could move that concept into the My Menus section, then we might be onto something there. But yeah, that one comes up quite a bit.
I'll be honest with you. One of the things that I hate about cameras these days is, and what was great about the Betacam days, were switches, man. I like switches. I hate this menu
systems, yeah.
But you could only control like 3 things
I don't
on
care.
that camera. That's why you could have switches.
No, you had switches. We had little tweakers. It was just easier. I hate menus. They're hard to go through. I agree with him. But I know where he's coming from. You got more questions?
I do. I had a great one from Moses a second ago. He said he thought the Panasonic, the shadows had much more detail in them. Can you speak to that, Bruce?
Well, I would go to the Panasonic and say it's a 10-bit structure. So once again, the math doesn't lie. You know, when you're dealing with that, you know, I think the underexposure on the Panasonic, you know, I think it lasted longer than in the 8-bit structure, you know, but slightly, and that's really when you're trying to break the camera is the only time that's going to be a problem.
But what about in the RAW?
I don't.
No, I mean in the Canon.
In the Canon RAW, yeah. Well,
Right.
but also, isn't it going to be about which manufacturer, where they place their 18% gray, how much, you know, if you're going deeper on one sensor, there's a price to pay on the other end. So, what he's asking about that detail? Would that necessarily be RAW versus latitude?
Well, but you know, the RAW obviously has much more latitude than
It has everything
either
the
of
sensor's got, yeah.
the TV outputs.
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
But the, you know, I think we tried when we tested these cameras of putting the 18%. We tried to do it scientifically with
By the numbers.
Yeah.
by the numbers, and that's why we didn't want to do charts in this thing. We just wanted to be real world with what we were doing, and we found that the scientific way of doing it didn't really work. So I decided to set my exposure as I always do with the Rec 709 output of that particular camera. I will set my exposure by that. And looking at the waveform of that Rec 709 output, because I know that, you know, in the log I'm gonna get more range than that. So I just kind of put that towards the high end, make sure that the whites are not peaking, and then try and get as much of the low end as I can.
Yeah.
I think it's an important point because I know that all the Facebook groups are going to go crazy when they hear Bruce say that.
Right.
What we did when we first set up to, you know, where's our standard at this test is, you know, I said to you, okay, well, our 18% gray is at 42 IRE, and you put that in, then we, you know, went at the two cameras, and they looked so crazily different because of the way that the
Right.
Rec 709 setups were set up on the camera. I was like, well, what are we even looking at here? It just didn't make any sense. So I was like, all right, well, let's actually expose the way people would probably expose two cameras and just have them be at the same kind of levels and then see where we go.
Right.
And the proof is kind of in the pudding. You can see that exposure ranges that, you know, they actually line up much more than they ever possibly could have if we had done it by the numbers, strictly by the numbers.
Right.
Okay, Rachel, what do you got?
I have a couple of things here, a couple of little specific things. Here we go. So just wanted to clarify what the ISO is on the EVA1
Mitch, you want to take that?
in the footage.
So it depends. There are slates for different parts of the material. We shot stuff at the 800 ISO, and we shot some stuff at the 2500 ISO, I believe. So I think
Not to pitch your camera, but you have a dual ISO
we have
system,
the, we
right?
have the two. Yeah, so we have dual native ISOs on EVA1, and it's basically that there are sort of, for every photo site, there's a different analog path that be able to extract the information. So there's sort of the standard way that all cameras kind of use, and that is our 800 base, which is pretty much all the cameras out there and kind of in that same kind of territory. And then we have our sort of specialized way that is tailored exactly to the nature of the way the sensor works. And so that's our native 2500 ISO. And the way that you can say that these are both native ISOs is that they are both 14 stops of dynamic range available when you're shooting with them, and your highlight is at the point just before clipping and such, and you get that full range. And then, because then if you applied a negative or positive gain to either one of those, that would start to clip, one side or the other. So I believe that what we were seeing is stuff that was at the 800 ISO, but I know that we also have material, especially when we did nighttime exterior, that we did with the 2500 ISO as well. So we had a comparison.
If you view the 30-minute clip that we're going to put up at the end, it's going to go through a ramping of ISOs from 800 all the way to 25,000 or whatever. Rachel, I know you got another question.
Yeah, I've got one question, and then we could probably move on to the next clip. So we actually have several people asking asking about 10-bit 422 for the C200.
Yeah, I kind of knew that one was coming. Sounds like a good idea, but it is not on our radar at the moment. Which,
Well, you have cameras that do that.
We do. I mean, we can move to the C300 Mark II and so on, but in the C200 at this point, RAW is your best codec. The MP4 codecs are 4208-bit. So depending on your application, 4208-bit may not fly in a broadcast environment. You've got to go to the RAW on that one. So that one's really wrapped around RAW.
And what is the as far, you know, the only reason I don't shoot in RAW if I'm doing a feature, and you know, I recently used your 300 Mark II, right. And the only reason I didn't do RAW was because I couldn't afford to buy that many hard drives, you know,
correct,
to do my. So how much bigger is the RAW footage than the
quite a bit actually. Yeah. Although you're going to go through cards. There's no question.
Right.
Cards, but also we did that feature a year ago, maybe a little more.
Yeah.
And the cards are half the price of when we started that. We might have been able to pull that off actually, if it had been a year ago.
Wait, let's talk about the cards. What kind of cards are they, and what does it cost?
CFast 128s. God, it's like the stock market. I'd have to look to see what they're selling for these days.
About
128, $100 range.
I think it's a little bit more than that.
100 and a quarter.
And let's talk about your cards. How much are those, and what are you using?
So we use SD cards, SDXC cards, and it depends on the recording format that you're going to use in it. Because again, we're going to have the long op, and we have the long op, and you're going to have the all eye. If you have a V60 class or above, that'll do everything you would ever need. We make our own cards. We don't even make a V60. We make a V90. So it's like, you know, super performing. There are other manufacturers.
How much is that?
Our cards, I'm not going to lie, our cards are premium cards, and so they're not inexpensive. So a 64 gig card is like $250. But there are other manufacturers that have cards at, you know, $100 range for 128 gig. So it is a pretty affordable system, and also because we're talking about a long op or an all-eye compression in 10-bit 422, you're going to get a lot more on that than you would get, say, in a RAW file, even with the compressed RAW file that C200 uses. So, you know, you can't just go by the numbers of gigs. You say, like, well, what's my runtime? What do I actually get out of that?
Rachel, do we have any more questions in this segment?
Be clear on that one too.
Okay.
We also have an SD option in the same camera.
Oh, okay.
So you can shoot with SD cards as well.
You had to get that in there, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to mislead it.
For the 8-bit video.
For the 8-bit video, yeah. You don't have to use CFast for everything.
Do you have more questions, or do you want to move on?
Let's just ask this one because it's on topic, and then we can move on.
Okay.
So Ryan Stevenson is asking if there's a reason the EVA1 colors feel a lot more saturated than the C200 and the LUT graded night shots. And was that a creative choice from Bruce, or is it a carryover from the RAW footage?
No, I did find that what I was looking at on the monitors in the side by side, I was for the night bright colors, I was getting a lot more color saturation in those footage than I was from the.
But you weren't using RAW footage on the EVA.
No, it wasn't.
Right, so it's not.
I think we said RAW. I think it meant ungraded.
Ungraded. Right. Yeah, the question I think should have said ungraded.
Yeah, but we're just talking about a LUT anyways.
Right.
Not raw data file.
Yeah,
right. It wasn't raw data file. Right.
Or log.
Right.
Log.
Once again, I'm talking about what I'm seeing on the two VTRs with the LUT that each camera puts out. I was seeing more color saturation in the highlights.
Yeah, I think it's in the highlights, and I also find when people just want to like look back at those videos and really compare, you know, bit to bit, I find that in the midtones, that where the color lands and how much richness, because you can always go into your color correct system and go and say, oh well, I'm going to go to the midtones, I'm going to pump the saturation here, and you know, and like I want to see a little more in the greens, whatever. You have that ability, but what sort of plays right out of the thing? I find we have a little more saturation.
And do you think that's because of the sensor, or it's because of the LUT that's coming out of the camera?
When RAW happens, you'll know.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. You'll be able to analyze it yourself.
All right, Ryan. Let's move on to our first nighttime clip. Our first exterior daytime clip.
It is a cold, cold Chicago day. We're able to get bright specular highlights off the building and reflecting onto the water.
It has a lot of different effects on the sensors and technology, so it's a really good test as far as pressure testing these cameras.
So I cranked them. I did 1.5 stops underexposed and 3 stops underexposed.
We did some stuff with playing with the color temperature and doing different frame rates and such.
And this really helps cinematographers choose what they're going to shoot and what the benefits are of these ISOs.
A lot of different things we can be able to see here, and frankly the cameras can handle the cold a lot better than we can.
All right, Bruce, what do you got?
Well, it was really cold. My feet were very, very painful.
Yeah, it was rough. I didn't like it.
Especially by lunchtime. Were you there, Steve? I can't remember.
I wasn't there, man. I failed. For a few seconds.
But by the down by the river in January, yes, it's not really where you want to be. But being underneath this bridge, what you're looking at now is a bunch of negative fill in the foreground. So these are guys that are really walking into darkness. But still, you can see, even with the graded lot, there's still a lot of light on their faces. So,
I mean, the interesting thing about this shot is you have this mirrored top. I mean, and then you have that blown out background, and then you have these people in silhouette in the front.
Right.
I mean, this is the camera kill box, as he refers to it.
it is. And once again, what I would do with the highlights is I put those highlights right at like 95. My sky highlights at 95 and let everything else fall where it might on the scope.
How do you feel about what you got going on here with your camera?
Well, I think that this in particular was quite fascinating because when we go back to the full size of the frame, what you see is in the highlights especially, so like those bright buildings in the background. When we got into color correct, when we were looking at the footage, you could really start to see the difference in the cameras. That was where just the nature of the sensors and how the cameras are driven, where you would hold the highlights, certain colors of the highlights you would hold, if you still wanted to retain details in the shadows. Very different performance out of the cameras. Now you were able to grade them and get them, looking a lot like each other, but coming out of the box, you can look at the buildings way in the background. It was quite different. I was very happy with our performance. I think that we're very true to the scene. We captured a lot of information, but I was like, wow, it was very noticeable to me. It was quite impressive.
Bruce, what about the hottest of hots? Did you keep everything, or did some stuff get blown out?
Well, things changed a little bit over the day. On that shot particularly, you can see the detail in the sky, which normally in a grade you don't want to see because it starts to look compressed and unnatural. So, I've taken those whites up because there was no detail in them.
So you blew them out totally? They're gone?
No, well, in the grade I did.
In the grade, yeah.
But there was no detail anyway. There were no clouds there or anything, so there was nothing really to grab hold of. But once again, in the highlights, I thought the EVA had more color saturation than the Canon.
What about in RAW?
Well, RAW is such a different animal. You can do so much with it. Like I say, the math doesn't lie, and it's much more malleable, the footage.
So 2 quick points about this. First of all, I really love this clip, and the cold, icy, it all comes through. The 2 things that I love about it is, one, I wasn't there.
Yes,
I'm sitting in a warm studio drinking coffee and talking about it while my coworker Ken Rowe was there for all this and did a great job. But second is, I see HDR in there, and I know that's maybe a little off topic, but there's a lot of opportunity for high dynamic range.
Yes.
And that's a big thing now and getting bigger every day. Did you kind of feel, we didn't do a HDR pass on this,
no.
But did you get the sense that there was a lot of HDR there that would have played well? I'd love to have this in HDR grade and show off our HDR monitors because it's a great shot for that.
Right.
But where do you see that going?
And especially there was some highlights in the first take that we did. You can see a little bit of the highlights there, not in this shot. But yeah, it's a great HDR shot because you've got real real blacks in the foreground and you
Yeah.
got the real highlights in the background.
Yeah, it would be an
I would like to see that.
It would
too.
be interesting to do an
Yeah.
HDR grade on this, just
Yeah.
to see where it comes, because we're all going to be in the HDR world before you know it.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I look for when I look at HDR footage is not just a bright white and a dark black, but I look for, say, a bright blue and a middle tone green or so. I mean, because you want to be able to see how the colors track in that extreme range of dynamic range.
Well, that's the most exciting thing about HDR for me, and it's not the, I have no interest in seeing highlights on cars that are like burning my eyeballs or whatever. So, I think HDR is like, okay, instead of going from 1 to 100, we're going from 1 to 10,000, but you don't have to use all that range. So it just gives you a range to be creative in,
And I think creatively, HDR is going to be more of a privilege than a right. It shouldn't, which in some cases it was. But I mean, in particular, the highlights in the buildings that you said you let burn out would have had detail, would have had information. It might have made for a more interesting picture.
Yes.
So.
Rachel?
Yep.
Yeah, I have some people talking about working on this in post and how easy it is working with different file sizes, and when Canon CineLight RAW will be supported by Premiere Pro in particular.
Good question.
Kind of my earwig went out again.
Oh,
just a
okay.
second
One
here.
more time. He didn't have his
The
ear.
word right before Premiere Pro was mine.
When Canon CineLight RAW will be supported by Premiere Pro, but in general about working with the different files in post.
Am I supposed to say this? It will be, but I think I'm not allowed to say that yet.
Well, you just did.
Yeah, it's just
did.
the four of us. But yes, we're working with Adobe, and I might have just jumped up, but we'll see.
I mean, come on. There's three editing platforms.
Absolutely.
It's obvious.
Absolutely, and so obviously we're going to be able to work with them as soon as we can. So, which shouldn't be too long. Did I say too much?
Avid works with Avid.
Works with Avid, or we're already on
Final Cut.
Final Cut. We're playing in DaVinci all the time. And So yeah.
Now, what about when the Panasonic's RAW?
The idea is to have a lot of support for it. Now, of course, Canon records their own RAW, and so it is their format, and then they get it into post systems. We output a RAW signal that goes to recorders, so that's going to be in that recorded format that's with the recorders. Now, we are working with all the companies, so we work with the post companies, we work with NLEs, we work with the recorder companies, so we want to have an environment all working together. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, there will be support properly.
I can't until you tell me what the recorder is, and that's all bullshit. So
you ain't gonna hear today. Sorry,
well, then I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you'll find out soon enough. There will be an ecosystem that is very well supported. How's that sound?
But
your
RAW will be supported by Resolve.
There will be a raw output from our camera,
right?
And that will go to at least one record system, and then that record system will then have NLE support natively.
So basically, the RAW coming out of the camera, the recorder will determine how it's wrapped.
Right.
Where in the case of a Canon, it's an RMF file. It's saved as an RMF file, whether it's recorded here or internally. But in your case, it could be something else. But it'll be raw, wrapped in some sort of.
So let me give you an example with the Vericam, which is already established with the raw output from that. That is an interim raw structure format that's just in between the camera and the recorder, that no one else ever sees that. And then the recorders will take that as a raw file and capture it as Cinema DNG. Cinema DNG is pretty universal. That's going into Resolve, that's going into Premiere, that's going to various systems so you can directly work with those files.
So is it debared? Is that signal pre-debared?
That's not debared. That is still a raw file.
Okay.
So Cinema DNG is still a raw file.
Now I noticed with Canon that we if I let Resolve do the debayering, that you had a program that was that did debayering, and I don't see a lot of difference by eye, but I definitely see a difference on the scope between those two programs. So
Yeah, essentially, you're either going to use the Canon supplied debear system, which is what we recommend. From a quality control standpoint, we understand that one.
Right.
But you can also debear it in third-party software as well. Codex has their own debearing system, and DaVinci has their own debearing system. You'd have to use them all pretty extensively to really understand the subtle differences about the way things work
Right.
a little bit differently. But yeah, they do, depending on how it's debared, depends on the final product. It will affect it, yeah.
It's
Okay.
like going back to the lab and, back into the film days, and you would have this lab use a little bit hotter temperature on the thing, and it was always, you had a slight difference if you went to Technicolor, whether you went to Deluxe. It's the same kind of thing. You can actually have different raw debear systems. This is getting into the weeds here, but you could really get a slightly different thing out of your
So
file.
are you going to have your
Yeah.
own debearing system, or will that be Cinema DNG through Resolve? If I'm in Resolve.
We'll have a conversation in a few weeks. I'll tell you all about
Okay.
it.
All right.
Rachel, what do you
Guys, I'm
got?
going to interrupt and ask. I've got just a few little sort of technical questions here. Trevor, I'm sorry, Trevor, I can't pronounce your last name, asks how many button pushes does each camera require to go from shooting 23.978 to 60p?
I don't
You
know
guys know that
because
off the top of your head?
I don't
Liz?
know because I just asked for it, and we had a wonderful assistant camera
Yeah.
person that was.
I will say that if you know you're going to do it, so you prep the camera beforehand, it is 1.
Can't you do a pre-programmed switch for it or no?
Yeah, well, what you would do is that you can set your, like, if you're going to be, say, 4K, and you're going to be you're going to want to go to 60p, then you set your camera to the mode that's going to be able to shoot in 4K 60p, and you can be in variable frame rates, so you could go from the 24 or 2398 and go to 60, and you could literally, there's a switch that you could have preset so that when you turn one knob, there's one little wheel, and that's going to flip between those two.
Yeah, my experience is that you don't know ahead of time that you're going to do that.
You
I mean, you do for
custom set up
test.
your camera to get it down to 2. You could not custom set your camera and be there all day. It's one of those things as to where you put it in the menu system, how quick you can get it, whether you assign a button for that. Yeah. So, but there's ways to move it on. And I understand where that question is coming from. That goes back to your days of switches, like you were saying.
Yeah,
you want to switch. You really do. That's a legitimate point. It should be just a 1.
Yeah.
But the answer should always be 1. But
How many pre-programmed buttons do you have on your camera?
7 or 8 can be
How many do you
assignable,
have?
something like that.
We have
Maybe
What's the
9.
number?
We have 9 buttons, 1 toggle switch that also can be
Well, I like the
pre-programmed.
switches better than
So
the
that,
buttons.
so that switch you could preset to what its center position
Yeah.
has 3 different things. it
I
can
like
do.
the Betacam ones. Remember those little, or the NASA style.
Those are
great.
very satisfying little switch.
Very satisfying.
That little
the
button
proper
like-
word.
Yep.
Rachel, what do you got? I know we want to do a question and then we got to move on.
Sure. Moses just asked whether he's curious whether Panasonic ever seriously entertained the idea of releasing the EVA1 with an EVF.
We seriously entertain everything. It was a 2-year process in the development of the camera, and there's a couple parts to it, and I'm not going to bore you to death. It's when literally 95% of the people said we never used these little pigtail eyepiece things that like a vestigial kind of thing that were on the back of a camera. Choices had to be made with the camera because we wanted to have it really small and really lightweight, and we wanted to be able to use our small camcorder batteries. And that meant that those batteries can output 20 watts of power, so that was our limit. Everything that, it was going to be choices. The camera runs at 19 point something watts. So we put in as many things as we could. If we included an eyepiece, then that would be like, all right, well, that means something else is going to have to go. So there was a bunch of choices. It's also, you can say, like, how much you're going to charge for the camera because it's what it costs to put something in, and how much it weighs, all that, lots and lots of factors.
The bottom line is that you need an EVF.
If
If you need an EVF,
I
I'm not
know
gonna
a
say anything
company
more.
that makes a really nice OLED.
I don't.
Works well with it.
Yeah, I don't ever get into that, but you need an EVF.
I need to jump in because we produce 2 flavors of the 200.
Yeah.
You have the 200 and the 200B. So in our case, you could buy it either way. And yes, it was because a lot of people said, look, I've never put my eye to that cup on the C300 series. Why do I need it? And in some cases, they didn't. Some people would prefer to buy a high-end third-party viewfinder, which happens a lot. But also, all the gimbals. The EVS just always seems to get in the way.
Exactly.
You know, getting it on
Yeah.
a Ronin, getting it on a Movi. The EVF is just this thing that always wants to knock into something. So yeah, you can get the C200 or the C200B, and the B would be without the viewfinder on the back.
And of
Rachel,
course, I'm from the dark side, so I use monitors to operate
oh,
with.
you pain me with
Yeah,
that.
you don't need.
This is the thing I don't get. You're from the film school where you had an EV.
I had to use it. Right. I had
mean,
to.
That was the only way
You
you
probably
could
had a
send it.
big extender viewfinder and the
Right.
whole thing,
terrible.
but and now you use a monitor. That's probably because you can't see anymore, right?
No, it really isn't.
You really? What do you do when you're outside? You put
well,
a big.
the thing
Are you
when
Ansel Adams here?
When you're using a viewfinder, you know all that stuff with the rod that to keep it erect.
Nobody's
and, you know,
doing this
it's like,
anymore.
you know, I can turn a camera 180 degrees, you know, with a monitor, and I don't have to move my body around, or you know.
Yeah.
And it gives you freedom of movement.
Yeah, but you can't see it outside. But okay, enough on that. Rachel, I'm seeing texts coming from you. So you have some questions. What's going on?
I do. I have a question which I think will be really great to lead us into the next piece of footage. It's more of a comment saying that Canon is really retaining the crispness at distances, and maybe Panasonic isn't. And I think maybe if we roll the next footage, we'll be able to talk about that a little bit more too.
Okay, so the last scene that we're going to do is the nighttime exterior. Why don't you roll that, Ryan?
Well, the night test is probably the ultimate test of the camera.
There's a lot of activity on the water and the small twinkling lights, and this is where you're going to start to notice grain structure.
If there's any place that's going to be a camera kill box, this is kind of that area. I mean, this is designed to break a camera.
People think these cameras all look alike, and they don't.
Both cameras had, I won't say very different characteristics, but they definitely had their own individual flavors.
So this will be interesting to compare what the noise pattern and structure, the characteristic, the personality, if you will, of the EVA1 is compared to the C200.
All right, Bruce, let's get a little, what do we got?
Okay, well, first of all, we got temperatures that came up about 15 degrees, I think. So uncharacteristically, the night was a lot more pleasant to be in than the day was. I don't know if it's because the wind died down. But we have footage that's lit here and some footage that's completely unlit. Right now we have a light on the camera left side that they walk into. We had some flags so that where they are now is you don't see any light, and then they come into the light. And of course we had these LEDs down the bottom, which when we turned all the lights off, were enough to give us exposure with all the cameras in all the different modes. I think the underexposure of this scene is a lot more. I think the underexposure, you lose detail more quickly in this, and once again, I would go for a really thick negative on this. I enjoyed grading the overexposed stuff a lot more than I did with the underexposed stuff.
Yeah, so just so people know, when we're referring to a thick negative or a dense negative is what I used to call it,
Right.
it means that you are really bringing up every single thing you can, and
there was nothing there really that until you were like, I think we did some stuff at like 25,000 ASA wide open.
Just to do it.
And just to do it, but it looked fabulous in
but
the
what
grade.
about bringing up, when you bring it up, you're not bringing up the noise floor?
What noise, really?
I'm just
it's like,
asking, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you are, but because you've overexposed it, you're
Oh,
cranking
you're
all that
cranking it
stuff down, and
Right.
all the noise goes away. You know.
Okay, Rachel, what do you got?
I think you'd like to know that your best friend Philip Bloom has just arrived and is commenting.
Oh,
Everybody
uh-oh.
say hi, Phil.
Hey, Phil.
Hello, Phil.
Tell him he's going to be on our second live show that we do. We haven't told
Well, I'm
him
sure
yet.
he just heard you, so I'm
Oh,
sure
okay.
he'll be
Yeah,
thrilled.
right. Okay. How's it going, mate?
Quick question. Will the EVA1 support 2K 240 RAW in future updates and an anamorphic setting similar to the GH5?
2K 240 RAW is coming in a few weeks. That's going to be one of the output formats that we do. So as far as anamorphic, it was not something that was in the original concept on the camera, and so it's been suggested to the engineers, like, hey, maybe we could do this, and it's one of those things where it's like, all right, we're gonna have a whole list of things. What things can we squeeze in? It's on our list of things to try and make happen. We'll see.
I mean, how do you do that? What the mount? My favorite feature on that camera is the Canon mount.
I'm sure it is.
And I think it was a brilliant choice.
There are a couple of lenses that are available with interchangeable mounts, and Canon EF is one of the options for it.
But not an anamorphic.
There actually are a couple of them. Not a lot, just a couple. The new Atlas lenses, as well as the one from Singapore.
It's really hard to find anamorphic EF.
Exactly, and then
I've never actually seen it.
And then there are a few people out there who take take an EF lens and they put an anamorphic adapter on the front. It's a limited thing. Not my favorite. It's a little hard. But I would also point out that there is a third-party manufacturer who is making a retrofit for the camera to put a PL mount on, so that you could.
Yeah, then it will work.
But that is one of the reasons.
Making sense. But
that is one of the reasons that it was never part of the original plan on the cameras, because there weren't any anamorphic lenses.
Correct.
In the format.
And would your anamorphic be like a 4.3 D squeeze or a 16:9 crop or?
Well, 16:9 crop is not anamorphic.
I know.
So I would say. We'll have to see.
Wow, a lot of unanswered questions there, Mitch. Rachel, what do we have next?
I just want to remind everybody that we do have the 4K shots on YouTube. Our Karen James just came back and said that the C200 in particular is looking much better in 4K. Just a little reminder there.
Well, everything's going to look better in 4K, but okay.
In general, yeah, people here are saying, this is kind of a random one, the C200 is getting hot because of a vent on the left side. Tim, do you have any suggestions?
It's getting hot because of the vent is on the left side.
Yeah.
It didn't run hot during the test, I guarantee it. It was freezing out there. This is probably completely wrong at this point, but there's a spongy filter in that vent that needs to be blown out on a pretty regular basis. I don't know if this is fresh out of a box or you've been shooting out in the desert, but yes, you want to keep that as clean as possible because we have, on any camera, we've had some issues with venting. If you find that fan is coming on a lot and it's overheating a lot, look to see if your air filter is clean. If not, get it into service because it shouldn't be.
So we now have air. So these are like cars now. We have to clean our air filter. Does it need oil?
Parts of it probably, yes. No.
Okay.
No, I think we're past the oil days.
Okay.
But, there is. But do that. Blow it. Just get a can of compressed air.
Wow.
If not.
Can you plug it in and get a diagnostic code from it?
We can. You can. But yes, we can, absolutely.
Rachel, what else do you got?
Maybe we could talk a bit about the lenses you used.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Lens mounts.
Well,
Wow.
yeah, we decided to have them identical lenses because that was a choice. We had 4 lens choices that we were going to use, and in the end we only used one of those lenses. One of the reasons because with the range of tests that we did, the wide zoom gave us everything that we needed to have. So because the lens change with that system, we'd have to change the parallax, we'd have to change the dual focus knob, and
But that was an amazing lens. I mean,
yeah, you end up using the Canon City zooms, which there's 22 grand a piece. Good lenses, but it's worth talking about lenses. We're both working now in the EF mount on this one, so really specifically, Canon has sold, I think, over 130 million EF lenses since the mount was invented. But there's a difference between a 4K lens and any EF lens. What that $20,000 lens does is guarantee 4K at every T-stop, at every focal point, all through, and at every zoom point, corner to corner, edge to edge. If you're using our still lenses, which are incredibly good, And they will resolve 4K, but not always, not everywhere through. They're not designed for that. So if we get caught up in 4K in resolution, but we're not really looking at which lenses really produce 4K, 4K files. You can take a 20 megapixel still camera, put an $80 lens on the front, and come up with a file that's well over 4K. It doesn't mean your image has that. So there's a reason to use good glass.
Now, what
In
about
your case, you used
coatings?
great.
Aren't
And
coatings
coatings make a
an
big
issue?
difference as well. Yeah, they're coated a little bit differently. But cinema glass really is geared towards coatings and detail, edge to edge, corner to corner, dead center, out to the left, out to the right. Still lenses don't have to work to that sort of same standard. So.
So Bruce, when you were choosing the lens, you I know originally we did have a couple of different options. And what was the aperture? This is an f2.0 lens, right?
2.8.
2.8. Although that was
T2.8 to be
is
specific.
absolutely irrelevant to what we were shooting, except maybe in the night.
Well, the night, our biggest test with the 2500, they're wide open. It was the only time that we really used the lens wide open at all. I think
Really?
Most of the time it was at a 4.
Yeah,
Wow.
even for the interior night stuff, I don't think you weren't wide open
Yeah.
on those. And I mean, they're nice lenses. They're what's it, the 15 to 45?
It was a 1547, yeah.
15 to 47, right?
Yeah,
That
and
Mitch had on.
we love that lens because the other thing is that I often like to use really old glass on new sensors, to just for that look. But
Yeah,
we certainly didn't want to do that for this test.
And it probably wouldn't have been right for this test. And lenses have their own personality, like sensors have their own personality.
Right.
And old glass is very popular in terms of sort of taking the edge off of a video.
Everybody's using old glass.
Yeah,
My God, all the DPs I talk to, they're like
Old person.
They want to cut. They want to cut down the resolution. It's too harsh.
It can be. I mean, we're maybe back to the days of putting nylon netting on the back of a glass, but Canon made a series of lenses called K35s back when you were in film school.
Never in film school.
Never
Go
in
on.
film school. Back when you were applying to film schools.
No,
but anyway,
never.
Never. But we stopped making those 30 years ago. And if I don't get a call once a week for can I get a set of K35s, and we stopped producing those about 30 years ago.
Wow.
They're still. If you'd have bought a couple of batches of those and still had them,
Nice investment.
oh my God, yes, absolutely. Lenses are always a good investment, by the way.
I want to move. Well, obviously, thank God that's the one thing that
Yeah.
is a constant. So,
Yeah.
in my mind, if people are investing, these cameras are changing every 3
Correct.
months.
Yep.
The
Give
glass
them a little bit longer than 3 months.
Whatever.
A little bit
The
longer.
the glass is what I would be spending your money on, and food. But I want to get to some final thoughts here. So let's start here, and we're going to work our way around. Final thoughts.
Well, final thoughts are, I mean, first off, I think both cameras perform well. I think that it's, to me, really interesting to look at the differences between them. And, that's why it's great that we have the ungraded, then the 709, and then the finished grade that Bruce was going for, because you really can see the difference in the performance of the cameras, where some color was retained, where some detail was retained. People look at numbers, specs all the time, and numbers and specs mean very, very little at a certain point. I mean, it's just a series of numbers. You look at the image, you analyze it. There are big differences between these two cameras.
Yeah.
You can look at the pictures and be like, yeah, they had different personalities to
I
them.
thought your camera actually looked really good, even compared to the RAW. I thought it looked nice. But you had the 10-bit going for you. Rachel, why don't before we hit Tim on his final thoughts, you have this question that's starting to really circulate on the comments. What is it?
I know we talked about this already, Tim, but a lot of new people are coming in, and a lot of people are talking about 10-bit 422. If you wouldn't mind just giving us your spiel again,
Well, the answer.
I'm sure that would be appreciated.
The answer didn't change.
Well, the new people came.
Yes, it's. Please keep screaming for it. Keep in public forums. We read those. And if we bang them over the head long enough, but right now it's a possibility, But the harder they scream, the longer they scream, the better the possibility.
But in all reality, I mean, you can't make, here you are, you're a camera manufacturer. You have cameras that cost, you know, $38,000 or will, all the way down to $7,000. You know,
less.
I mean, can everybody expect that the lowest end camera has all the features of the higher end cameras?
Yeah, you have to also understand that you know, if there's a reason one camera costs more than the other. But that said, as much as Steve is throwing me shade here, we should have it. So yeah, well, just if enough peer pressure tends to work wonders.
Okay, final
you know,
thoughts on the test and how you perform.
It's funny, Phil Bloom called in and it took me back to the shootouts we used to do with Philip. Yeah. And the difference between this one and the other ones is we put the cameras together side by side, and there's no moment now where you gasp and go, oh my God, they're not going to like this. You know, where the image, it looked great. Ours looked great. Cameras have gotten to the point where you need to find nuances in them. You need to find the right glass for them. You need to find the right workflow for you, the right look. But it used to be back in the day, you'd go, okay, I'm not buying that one. Look at that, and I'll buy this one. You can't really pronounce a winner anymore. You know?
Okay, well, here's where I'm going to call you on this, Bruce. What camera are you? I want to know when you would want to use that Panasonic and when you would want to use that Canon. If I gave them both, they gave them both to you for free.
The way that I choose cameras for my projects is that I walk into the production office and the producer tells me, "Oh yeah, we just bought a couple of Lexus, you know, that's the camera we're going to use," or we just bought a couple of Reds, or we just bought some Canons, you know. So
I'm pushing you on this.
So I really am very camera agnostic, because I didn't used to be when you know. When dynamic ranges changed all the time and people didn't really have the hang of the sensors. But what I would say is that in everything that I looked at, the math doesn't lie.
Okay, I'm going to push you hard here.
Okay.
When does his camera excel, and when does his camera excel?
I think the Canon excels in flesh tones that are lit, you know. I love the look of the EVA at night, and the bright highlights had a lot of chroma to them and looked fabulous. So, you know, I think the camera's got a crisper, contrasty look, and the color goes along with it. But once again, it's 10-bit versus 8-bit versus raw.
But those are all the numbers, and it's very valid. But I think that goes back to what I was already saying, was that, look, I have to take people who come up and say, what camera should I get throughout the Canon line? And what would I put a C200 person into versus a C300 Mark II person in? And if they come up and say, look, I'm shooting wedding event, C200, go to the 200. They're saying, I'm shooting 3-camera reality TV, go to the 300 Mark II. Because there's different features and different things you need to make it function that way. I'm not going to shoot 4K. Well, we got the C100 as well. And then we also have our C700 when they still come shooting a blockbuster. So it's not so much about this is over, that picture was good, this picture wasn't good. There's a lot more to consider now than just the image.
Yeah, and I would also mention that there's other aspects to these cameras that are very important, like your physical interface and just how you handle it, and like where the controls are located. That can be a very particular thing for people. And you know, if you're not comfortable using the box, then it doesn't matter what it looks like. You can't get a good image out of it because you're not comfortable with it.
To me, that's the most important thing.
Exactly. that usability factor is huge.
Ergonomics.
And ergonomics, but also just like the way your mind works versus the way the camera is set up to be used. You know, it's not necessarily better. It's just a little different. I would also say that there's things like the different outputs, you know, the different connectivity of a camera. If you don't need that, if you're a one-man band kind of thing and you're not going to have a separate monitor or whatever, then you don't really care so much. But if you're going to be feeding something to a client, or just a director standing next to you and be able to see the monitor, like what kind of connections do you have and what resolutions and LUTs and whatever, that's important stuff to look at for the way you need to work.
And I think workflow is how I choose a camera. Now that's really because I'm a colorist and an editor, and I might just be editing my own footage. I might be most likely I'll be coloring my own footage. So, the workflows are getting easier and easier. But when I started out with the Red camera, I found it, I had to buy a very expensive card just to transcode the footage. Now, almost everything now comes and works directly with Resolve. So I know you're not going to tell me whether your 4K image does that, but
okay. I got to wrap this up. I want to obviously thank you for, I love having you here, so it doesn't much matter, but I want to thank you for being the administrator again.
Great.
I want to thank you guys. This was a really terrific experience. It was easy. The whole live nature of it, I think, went pretty well, actually. It was kind of fun. And now I'm going to toss it back to Rachel because she is going to kind of close us out.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. I will be making a blog live on Zacuto.com shortly. It will include this full live show, all of the footage in 4K, including bonus footage like motion blur and slow motion tests. I will be watching the comments on the blog too, so please comment there and I'll bug these guys for answers for you. And just a reminder that the folks at B&H have put together great offers on lights, monitors, cases, Zacuto gears, graticles. So head to bnh.com/Zacuto event 18 to get the deal. They're valid until the 20th. I'll put the link in there. And CSI Rentals in New York is offering 25% off rentals for the C200 and EVA1 today in honor of the live show. Thank you to B&H, CSI, all of the guys, and thank you for watching and participating. See you next time.